I went, okay, let's control the stuff we can control. But really, it wasn't about control. It was about surrender.
Hello and welcome to No Place Like Home. I'm your host, Kath, and we're welcoming Jason today to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I know a little bit about you and what you do, but I'm excited to dig a little bit deeper into this. So I'd love to hear a bit about your background and then we can lead into family and...
Sure. So I'm a dad first, is what I like to identify as, I guess.
Yep.
I do work full time, but I'm trying to lead in with family and try that on for size. So what I do for work, I run Raising Fathers, an organization that helps men prepare for fatherhood and thrive once they get there, and hopefully their families too.
We'll definitely dig deeper on that in our next episode as well.
Yeah, and I've spent about 10 years working in the education space, and in a past life, I was a lawyer for a brief but unenjoyable time.
Amazing. That sounds interesting.
Different story, different podcast. Yeah.
We won't go there today. So had you been working at all in the birth or perinatal space before you became a dad?
Not even close. No. Wow. Knew, I think characteristically for men, very little about it. Knew we were having a baby. Yeah, did a little bit of preparation, but it was not on my radar. A lot changed to get me there.
So talk to me about your journey in then, because for a lot of people, we talk about mothers becoming mothers as soon as they conceive. It's not as natural for a father for that to feel the same thing. So obviously, wow, you find out you're pregnant.
Yep.
So Layla's your
Layla's
eldest.
my first. Yep.
Yeah. So talk me through.
Yeah, I think the first thing to note for me, I was always very excited to become a father. It's something, even from being a young boy, like probably 10, 11, some kids wanted to be astronauts, some wanted to be actors. I actually wanted to be a film director as a kid, but I really wanted to be a dad. It was just kids. I found kids adorable even when I was a kid. They still melt me, even other people's kids. I'm defenseless against their gorgeousness. And so I was always very excited. And we decided we were ready. And then, we were blessed to find out that quite quickly things had happened, and my wife was pregnant and we were going to have a baby girl. We found out, we were super excited. And then some interesting things happened because that was in late 2019. And so...
Hello, COVID.
Yeah. Our due date when Layla was born was during the first Melbourne lockdown. So interesting time.
Okay. So if you think about that journey, like obviously when the beginning of the pregnancy, we were all none the wiser about what was about to hit. What were your expectations?
It's so funny to talk about this because the message that I send fathers now through my work is basically to remedy the internal dialogue or message that I'd received that I think most men have, which is, I just didn't think that much about it, if I'm really honest. And it's humbling to say out loud, given what most of my time's focused on. There was this sense of, we'll work it out. Like we'll be all right. We're pretty good. And I read a couple of books, and I asked the people around me for, what's your advice? And their things were so unhelpful. I asked men for advice, and one was sleep, get a lot of sleep. You're going to be really tired. I'm like, okay, I've heard that. What else? And it wasn't really that helpful. And I think the sense I got, I have my older brother who had 3 kids already, so I got to see how he parented, but I didn't really know what we were in for. And so my preparation was really quite practical. I looked up some swaddling techniques, how to bathe baby, some of those basic things. And I went, this doesn't look so hard. Turns out I was wrong, but that was very much my attitude.
So when did this kick in for you? The practicalities of, I need to find out the stuff. give me your wisdom, people around me, or I need to know how to survive. I suppose that having seen your brother go through parenthood, like you sort of absorb things in a certain way, but from like a father's perspective, when did you say, okay, there's things that are really, really happening here?
Yeah. There were, I think, characteristically masculine things that I did, which was I hyper-focused on the pram, on the cot, like things with wheels and that you can build.
Great.
I
Very
remember
practical. That's amazing.
It really is. And I've seen, you know, there are people, I think, who default to that style. They go, what can I control? Let me focus on that, which is great. There's a bit more than that, I think, at play. But, I remember looking up at least 30 different styles of baby monitors and the pros and cons of whether the Wi-Fi based ones or the radio signal based ones were better. And this whole thing, and we barely ended up using it as a product. Same with the prams, like Upper Baby, and I'm not going to make them an ad, but basically we chose a pram, and I was like, okay, easy folding mechanism. That's what I'm looking for. I want to be able to fold it and put in the boot. And I just obsessed over it because I think it was this sense of, that's in my control, so I'll hyper focus on this. That happened gradually, but I'd say it was sort of late second trimester that I'd started to focus on that stuff.
So you're going through this journey with your wife who's getting more and more pregnant, and then things start to happen during COVID. Like, how different is that for you then? Assumably, even appointments and things at that point would have been down to one person. So even your contact with, midwives and doctors and whatever else that looked like, hospitals in general.
Yeah.
It probably, assumably, starts to get you being more distant. Or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, because it was our first time, it was our only time experiencing it, so we didn't have a different. But I think what was unsettling for us, was how quickly things were changing. So the rules were changing, meaning what we could plan to do was changing. For example, we had shared care between a midwifery group and an obstetrician, and we're planning a home birth and had a hospital backup, a private hospital. And as part of the home birthing, it's quite common to have a blow-up bath there, inflatable bath. In retrospect, it sounds funny, but we weren't allowed a bath because of something to do with cleanliness and water. It was very early on. It was the time when people were sanitizing iPads that came in the mail because they didn't know if it had COVID on it. It was a crazy time.
I think the things we know now just feels pretty whack.
Yeah, in retrospect.
But at the time, there was fear in all of us. So I get that.
Yeah, and certain appointments were done digitally. Things were changing. We coped. I think the harder thing was the isolation for my wife. Experiencing pregnancy physically isolated from other people. I think that was challenging. Just cuddling her mum, going for a walk, like some of those things that we just want that make us feel cozy and beautiful. She didn't get to have so much.
How much of that did you how much of this preparation or how much of birth and postpartum did you talk about with your wife? Like, what did that look like for you? Particularly that she didn't have other people that she was necessarily speaking to. What was your role in that?
Yeah, I think my role was certainly support. I think it always will be to some degree. And I'm sure we'll get to later. There are levels of what support can look like and how clued in men and partners can be. What it looked like practically, I went to some of the midwife appointments together. We came up with our birth preferences together. And so, we talked about it. We did a hypnobirthing course together, practiced that. We would do some of the visualizations, some of the massage techniques and the shaking thing. I always forget what that's called. Even down to moxie busting because our baby was breech at the start. And so we were watching this TV show with me holding this piece of charcoal near her big toe because apparently that helps babies turn, all the things.
Yeah. It sounds like you were pretty active. Like, you were,
I think so. It was very much led by her. And I just assisted where I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'd planned for this home birth experience with minimal intervention by the sound of just your planning.
Yeah.
What ended up happening?
This is the good bit.
Yeah. It's all good bits.
It's
Jason.
all good bits. This is the juicy bit. So it's COVID. My wife starts to feel some, what we think is Braxton Hicks, some early contractions, and the process begins. And one thing I did prepare quite well was, again, this perception of what can I control. I think is a bit of a thread for me, and it was the space was really important to me, and to a birthing mother, and I take pride in creating a nice physical environment. So I'd got all these different candles and incense and affirmation cards around the place and colors, and it was beautiful. The space was perfect, and I'd spent a long time perfecting that. And then what I remember is just a lot of what felt like waiting. It was very slow, very gentle, and then active labor eventually kicked in. And I think what I noticed firstly was that active labor, no one had quite prepared me as the birth partner for the shift in consciousness that happens for a mother as she enters active labor. The word we used was birthing dragoness, that she became this, she just inhabited this animalistic, primal, strong woman who had words but didn't feel like using them. Thought patterns were different. She would pace in a circle around the table. And I think, in retrospect, and for any dads who are listening, it's just creating space for that and respecting that shift. No one really told me about that. So I remember saying a couple of things, like I made a joke and it just didn't land because I was talking to a person who wasn't there. I was talking to a previous version, and I learned pretty quick, okay, cool, shut up. Tune in, attune to her space.
Yeah.
Things like grunting with her helped, actually embodying my primal self as well. I'm like, okay, words are going to be less helpful here. Touch will be helpful. Sound will be helpful, but we're communicating at a different plane. That was one of the first kind of realizations I had during it, and also, on reflection. And it went for a very long time, our first labor. And what ended up happening was the rate at which my partner's cervix was dilating was slower than expected. And we had, home birthing midwives who were very pro home birth, low intervention. So we had the same, I guess, overall birthing philosophy or perspective. And they were saying this is taking a long time. And it was that at that point where things started to kind of change flavor a little bit. My wife started to get very tired and wanting to nap. And it meant that when contractions came or surges came, she didn't really have the energy to push and use the energy that comes with it. She was just exhausted.
Yeah.
And I remember just being in this loop where, the midwife was saying, you guys should kiss and touch, stimulate some oxytocin. And we try, but it felt put on. We were both confused. And I think what I really struggled with, and interrupt me at any point if you have.
No, I'm interested. Keep going.
What I struggled with was the lack of certainty, confusion, and control that came with that my wife entered that crisis of confidence phase. I can't do this. The fatigue. Am I going to be able to birth our baby? And I kind of went in there with her, and I had reassuring words, but I didn't know the answer to that question. And I thought, we might end up in hospital. A high medically, intervening birth was something my wife was not wanting. We were pretty clear on that, but open to it should it be required medically. So kind of fear was starting to kick in there. And what I reflected on was my coping mechanism in all of that was to keep seeking control. So I would go and make teas and fill up teas for the midwives and my wife. I would put some snacks in the little toasty machine that I'd pre-prepared. I kept kind of managing the space so it was clean and easy to move around, which is all great at one level. But in the debrief and what I recognized later, months later of talking to my wife about it, was I was kind of subtly running away.
It felt that way, the way you described it.
Yeah.
Like that stepping back, and
it
was a lot and you didn't know what to do. That's kind of what I'm getting from
That's
you.
exactly right. Yeah. I went, okay, let's control the stuff we can control, but really it wasn't about control. It was about surrender.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that internal capacity with myself as a man. I hadn't cultivated that. And so I couldn't bring that. No one told me to, but also didn't naturally come through for me in the birthing process. And it was something that was missing. And I think my wife felt that,
Do you feel like this is a common thread? And we can dig deep more into this later.
I think it's extremely common.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, men in our culture aren't taught to be emotionally conversant, particularly when it's some of those softer emotions, or the ones where, again, they require surrender and a lack of doing. They require the emptiness. Yeah. That's a lot harder, I think, for a man to hold, because we're socially not given role models who do that. You have your people who are vulnerable in moments, and they're celebrated, and they should be. But by and large, I think any emotional training that we're given is around being stoic, around pulling it together, which is important too in moments. Men and humans need to be able to pull it together and get your proverbial, SHIT together. Yeah. And there are times where actually what you need to move through is to actually allow yourself to unravel and be in the mess with someone. And I didn't have that skill.
I mean, it's not something that you did a lot of preparation in other ways. It's not necessarily something that you would, and you never know how birth's going to go as much as you can have your own plans for it. So what ended up eventuating with this?
Oh, gosh, I need to share this bit. As you said that, I was thinking what happened. I just had Circle of Life just repeating in my head, because our playlist was about 6 hours long, and each time, and the last
you
song,
might have heard it for a few times.
The last song was that. And you were like, let's make that the one we birthed to, right? Bloody hell, it's so cliche. I remember, it was like the 5th or 6th time that we heard that, and we just looked at it, like, change the playlist. Understood, we're changing the playlist, because it was maddening. It was like, oh my God. And it felt,
this is longer than we'd planned.
It was about 36 hours of labor in the end. And there is this liminal space that gets entered, particularly during active labor, where it's, in some way it's psychedelic. You lose track of time. You don't know what's going on. It can be hard to be in that. And so what ended up happening was the midwives took me into a separate room, said, let's have a chat. I was like, okay, this isn't good.
Okay.
And they were beautiful in how they communicated it, but they were basically like, look, we'll give it another hour. If we don't see progress in the way we need to, and they were trying all their tricks and all their things that they know to speed it along, in a low intervention way. Yeah. They said, well, we'll need to go into hospital. And so that hour passes. It hadn't progressed. So we got in the car. Again, it's COVID. So, the midwife's like, do you want to drive? She can only take one person in with her. I'm a midwife. You're her husband. What do you want to do? And I was like, babe, hoping, please say me. And she said me. I was like, yes.
So they couldn't come in.
They couldn't come in. Midwives could not come in. Well, you could have one support person.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
That despite the fact that they're medically trained, they couldn't enter the space.
Nope. So they did the beautiful thing of asking me, are you in a space to drive? And I was like, no. So they drove us in at 3 a.m. to the hospital, wished us well. Oh my God. I still remember the moment where we got into the, we went through emergency. We go through, and as we're, it's so hard to describe it in words, but it's such a confusing space after that many hours of being through everything. At that point, later on, my partner could reach down and feel her baby's hair. So baby was coming.
Yeah.
And this woman who was there that wasn't a hospital worker started chit-chatting with us, having small talk, and we were still polite, but we were like, please stop asking us questions. We need to go. So we went in.
Yeah.
Our obstetrician was there, wide awake, ready to go. So we're gonna have a baby now. And I remember my wife going, really? There was still this disbelief that it could actually happen.
It's been so long.
Yeah. And by that point, dilation had happened, which was great, but there was no energy to push. We tried a few times and ended up using that suction device, which didn't work. So then we moved to forceps, and forceps worked with some pushing and some all the things. Baby came. She was here. It was absolutely stunning. I remember I just burst out crying. Most beautiful moment of my life.
Yeah.
Equal with my son's birth. And it was stunning. And I think, well, I'll pause there because it's a beautiful moment.
It's important as well to recognize the journey that went before that. But did that feel like it didn't even happen? That the long waiting for you, potentially for your wife, it's maybe for both of you, scarred in you a little bit. But did you feel like you could forget the hard yards that went before that?
It's a good question. My wife, certainly not. It took some time and some debriefing and help.
Yeah.
For me, yes, because I think, again, I think what happens for so many of us and what plagued me was a lack of awareness. And so while I knew it was hard, I was still in the coping mechanism being effective or believing it was effective. So I was like, that was hard, but we got through it. So it didn't leave an impression on me per se. It was only when I recognized the impression that it left on my partner that it impacted me in that way, a bit of guilt. And
did you feel like through that whole process, and particularly being during COVID, did you feel safe? Did you feel like you were adequately informed about what could happen? Like I hear you were doing a lot of planning about the plan that you really wanted, plan A.
Yep.
And you knew a little bit about plan B, which wasn't what you wanted, but obviously a lot transpired in between that. Like, how did that feel for you? And did you feel like you were supported and that you were going to get what you wanted in the end?
Well, one thing I should say is the story wasn't over. One thing that did happen that is probably worth tying in first is we thought we were good to go. Baby was born on mum's chest, and then time passed. We cut the cord, waiting for birthing the placenta. It didn't happen. And they tried the oxytocin injection to induce birthing the placenta. It didn't work, and it turns out it had adhered to the wall. So she had to actually go into theatre and have an operation, which was a bit of a thing.
Yeah.
And so my beautiful baby was given to me. I took my shirt off. We did the skin to skin. I got pooed on. It was gorgeous.
You were really christened into fatherhood.
And it was interesting. I remember being alone in this room. Everyone had gone to, and so they should have, to be with my partner, but I was holding my baby, and it did cross my mind. I was like, I hope she's okay. What if it's just me and you? And I just had this deep trust. I was like, no, she's going to be fine. I just kind of knew it. So that didn't stay with me.
Yeah.
But I do remember thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. And at one point, a midwife did come and said, oh, she probably got a blanket on you guys. She might be a bit cold. I was like, oh, yeah, no. We're both in a room at 4 or 5 a.m., basically naked. But we got through it. But yeah, to your question, did I feel supported? Look, the midwives were fantastic. And there was a degree to which we just really trusted them, that even as things didn't go to plan, I did have this sense that we were taken care of.
Okay.
Yeah, which was great.
Let's fast forward a little bit then. So the birth happened. It was lots of different things. Your wife goes off to theatre. She is okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, she does great.
But there was quite a journey that sat with all of that and not necessarily all of what you guys had planned. When did things sort of start to change for you? Whether it be like your wife having to debrief and look around what that looked like. When did this all start to like actually settle into your skin that this is permanent? This is what this looks like, and how did that feel?
The immediate postpartum experience was very different for me and my wife. We were both overwhelmingly happy. And what I should say, because I've talked about a depth of experience, is on the whole, we had a very medically successful birth. I would say on the whole, a non-traumatic birth. But I think, one of the things of trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you. And there were things that we both internalized that were hard. But I just want to say, on the scale of things, we had a great birth, even the first one. And so we were both overjoyed, we were so happy. But I think what was challenging for us early on was we were in a private hospital for a few days that we weren't planning to enter. We wanted to birth baby and go to bed that night and, be at home. And it was hard, and I only know this on reflection. It was hard for my partner because there were so many interruptions of people coming in and out of the room to measure baby, check for jaundice, do the hearing test, all of that stuff, that it almost felt like, just constant interruptions. And so it was hard for my wife to just sink in and actually be with her baby and feel relaxed.
What about for you?
For me, I was on cloud nine. I was so happy. I just remember, I was so happy. I was just so happy I had my kid. I looked at her all the time. I picked her up. I was just the best moment of my life. I was just so happy. I wanted to just share it with everyone. I wanted to text everyone, to call everyone. I was just so overjoyed. That was my experience.
Yeah.
It wasn't until quite a bit later where we started to really debrief the birth and the challenge, because we were both really happy and so glad the baby was here. And there's just the newness. It was COVID again, so we couldn't have visitors in the hospital, so we didn't have the parents or grandparents coming in and being with us. They were kind of dropping food at the door, and we weren't allowed to bring in our own food, and we'd sneak in some croissants and all
again,
of this,
you didn't know any different, so it was like,
that was
okay.
normal.
Yeah.
And then we got home, and again, no visitors allowed. I mean, I think by that point there was this whole exception of having a carer or something. We said, they're carers for our kid, but it was a strange time, certainly. Yeah. But once the dust had settled, we spoke more about the labor, and it took time. It took time, I think, for both of us to process our roles in it and the impact.
So when did your passion or your realization for the passion, which again we'll talk about shortly, but when did that kind of drop on you?
For this space, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I didn't mention was during the labor, I took a minute to myself and I went upstairs to the bathroom, and I remember at that point, I felt like my thoughts were going in loops, kind of like the playlist, and they weren't really making sense. And I found myself just feeling very, very vulnerable and out of control and helpless. My wife was in physical pain, was exhausted, just experiencing a lot, and there was nothing I could do. And that powerlessness really impacted me. And I just remember going to the bathroom and kind of breathing and looking in the mirror. And I can't remember whether I said it out loud or in my own head, but it was almost a prayer or a commitment. And I just said, if my daughter gets born safely, I will go and seek some help, which is something I'd never thought about doing before. I had, again, I think like many men, a stigma against mental health challenge. And what I felt like I was going through in that moment was something akin to a mental health challenge, and something that had been there already that I guess I hadn't needed to deal with because I could get through, And it was in that moment where I was struggling so deeply with myself And I was like, I need to be able to keep it together for my kid.
Mm.
And if I can't do that right now as my kid's on her way, I better get it together when she's here.
Yep.
And so I kind of had this moment of like, I need to take more responsibility for my emotional world and my mental world.
So that was during the labor for you?
That was during the labor.
Yeah.
It was my moment. I've called them, like, as I speak to other dads about this now, initiation moments where, you know, in traditional cultures, the way people get initiated is they're given a physical challenge, whether it's literally walking on hot coals or killing a lion or whatever it might be. I was like, that was my initiation moment where I was kind of staring at the fire going, I need to choose to walk through this and be different on the other side if I'm going to be who my kid needs me to be and who I want to be for them. And I went and I did that. I had such a stigma against it. I remember my fear, my narrative was, if I go and seek therapy, that means I have a problem. And if I have a problem and I seek help for it, I'm going to almost knead it deeper into my bones by admitting and acknowledging it, which is cute, and I get it.
Particularly because you do, like, that's what you try and buck now, right?
And that's why I wanted to bring that in, because that's what kind of sparked my passion for it, was recognizing that I was so ill prepared for birth, not at the practical level. I actually had my stuff together really well. It was no one and nothing had prepared me for the fact that labor itself and then kids are going to turn your world upside down, and your ability to manage your emotions, be present, especially when you're exhausted for your partner and your child, is the most important skill you can have. No one told me that bit. And I thought I was actually pretty good. And I think, you know, on the scale of things, I was probably decent, but I could be better. And that's what kind of birthed this for me, was starting to look for it and seeing that the dad preparation stuff out there, and bless them, it's great. It was all about birth and practical stuff, and that should exist. It's like, there is some much deeper stuff at play about what is your character as a man and who does that make you as a father. Didn't see it. And I was like, okay, something's got to change here.
I love that. I feel like that's a perfect spot to say, let's talk more about this in the next episode, and we'll talk more about raising fathers and
excellent
lead into your why. But thank you for telling us.
Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Cheers.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.